Hello? Hey, what's happening?
All right, so about to wing it. They got me outside, sitting on the bleachers.
Oh, they got you in the game.
Yeah, in the bleachers. I'm going to be turning around backwards to look at my computer.
Look, I understand. But hey, you're in it. They got you in the thick of things. So actually, that sounds pretty good.
Yeah, so I'm here. I'm set up. I changed everything. I updated my Microsoft certification.
Uh-huh.
Installed Windows. It's all good.
Okay.
So,
You say you started in 1250? Okay.
yeah, 1250.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, because as a matter of fact, yeah, with that being said, yeah, because I'm going to get started at one. I'm already,
Is it close to yours?
All right, can you hear me now?
I hear you now.
Okay, good. So I can hear you. You are good. So all I need to do is just bring you up. So,
All right, so
okay. And you got me in too.
yeah, I got you in.
Okay,
So
good.
what I'll do is just turn you down. And I guess if you want me, well, maybe I can bring you in. We could talk about some other stuff as well
Yeah.
before we get started. So I'm gonna go. I got 5 minutes. I'll go live, winging. Um, can you pull some shit up on Virginia State?
Yeah. Virginia
I know they're ranked eighth in the HBCU Pro Sports Media Alliance poll. This is their final road game before they head home. They have a record of
5-3.
yep, 5-3.
They are in the last three games. They are 1-2.
Yeah, yeah.
They won their
Lost to
last. They lost homecoming 41.
homecoming. Yeah, to Bowie State, and then they lost to Shawan.
Yes,
All right,
but they beat
right.
Elizabeth City.
Yeah. All right, got it. All right. All right. So get ready to rock and roll. 4 minutes. Make sure everything is up on the box correctly. Give me some crap. All right, got that. All right, take us out.
Hey, hold on just a minute. I'll be right back.
All right, so Mike Malloy, Kai Gray, 17 tackles last week. Kai Gray, 17 tackles for the Lions.
Let me get you.
Matthew Foster, Braden Brady, Leon Gaddy, Marlon Samuels, Jason Wright, Bruno.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. This is Michael Jefferson coming to you, and I am going to be live on Fox Sports today at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So join me as we discuss the upcoming HBCU football games at 1 p.m. here on YourStreet.tv. So join me on YourStreet.tv live at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 12 p.m. Central Standard Time, 1 hour before the big boombox classic between Jackson State University and Southern University. And of course, I have on my Jackson State gear. I try to not be as biased as I typically try not to be, but today I'm all the way biased. So we're going to see you live in a few minutes. So see you then. Okay, sorry about that.
All right. All right, Mike said Say hello to our Twitter followers listening to the presentation at krsbroadcast.com. Again, Orlando Hughes here with you solo. Everyone else is under the weather with a 5-3, ranked number 18 in the mid-majors. The Trojans of Virginia State taking on the 2-5 Lions of Lincoln University. Beautiful day. Everyone's fouling in here, and we're going to throw a little surprise to you because we have on the line joining us from Indianapolis. He's a Tiger, and it's a big day for his Jackson State Tigers as they take on those Jaguars of Southern University. That's Michael Jefferson of Fox Sports TV. And Mike, I don't know if you're there with us, but if you are, we welcome you into this broadcast.
Good afternoon.
Yeah, good afternoon, Michael. Welcome to Southern Philly, if you would, Pennsylvania here. Unusual because I feel like I'm broadcasting a high school, but the weather is beautiful. They had me outside the press box.
Hey, sounds like you're in great company with all of the fans and the students and everyone around you. Almost a great atmosphere, I would say, to be around.
Definitely a great atmosphere. We get ready. Two teams moving in completely different directions. You got this Virginia State team we mentioned, number 8 for the HBCU Pro Sports Media Alliance in mid-majors and HBCUs versus the Lincoln Lions.
Well, well, well. Good afternoon and welcome to Block Sports. This is Michael Jefferson, and it's great to be back, great to be live again. These past couple of weekends, we've had a couple of technical difficulties trying to go live to you from Albany State University, in which Albany State actually lost their homecoming game against Benedict. But that just lets you know that Benedict is just having a great, just an absolutely awesome season. And also last week we were in Jackson, Mississippi. And in Jackson, Mississippi, what transpired there was, of course, Jackson State University had their homecoming. Fortunately, yes, and let me rep my school, Jackson State University. We ended up winning our homecoming game by a score of 22-14 against the Campbell Camels. Say that real fast if you want to. But as I said, this was the Campbell Camels, and this was our first time playing against the Campbell Camels from the Big South Conference. And a lot of people believe that that was going to be Jackson State University's biggest and toughest rivalry of the year. But a lot of people don't understand. Yes, just because Jackson State, let me back up and let me put back on my professional face here. Just because Jackson State has played a team out of the Big South for the first time doesn't mean that hard games are not yet to come. And the reason why I say that is because this week, even though we have several other games that are out there that we will talk about, there are Jackson State this week is playing Southern University in the Boombox Classic. And in the Boombox Classic, that is a huge rivalry between Jackson State and Southern University. And with that being said, what happens between those two teams is that it's 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 going to be a blood. Well, let me rephrase that. It's going to be a very hard fought game. And the reason why I changed the statement is because this is football, and a lot of people are living a life. If I had brought up the connotation of being a bloodbath, we have to stay in prayer with the people of Ukraine in the fight that they are waging right now against the hostile takeover by the Russians. Even though I've never mentioned this online, but we need to keep other entities in prayer because we never know when something like this could happen to the United States. But but going back to football, uh, the game between Jackson State University and Southern is going to be rather it's going to be a huge game for a lot of people, and that game has roughly about 60,000 people. Oh, and then we're not even talking about what's in the stands, because what happens between Jackson State University and Southern when when Southern comes to town, you essentially have roughly about 60,000 people easily that will be in the stands in the vet at Jackson, Mississippi, because unfortunately they cannot hold that many people in Southern University. But taking a look at some of the games that are out there today, and also I just finished up speaking with Orlando Hughes, who happens to be at the football game of Lincoln University as they play Florida State University, and that game just kicked off. And on the other line, I just spoke to, and he's calling the game right now, Orlando Hughes, and he's with KRSB network, his network, and he's flying solo today. And so we're tuned in, listening to the game, and making sure that we keep you updated on that game. Now, in terms of some of the other scores and some of the other games that are actually going on today, uh, we're going to show you some of those courtesy of our game day. And on our website, we will show you some of these games here. And let's go ahead and switch over to those. And as you can see, some of the games that are being shown that will be on today, and some of these games have already started in the first quarter. You have games that are not associated with any of the HBCU conferences. You have the West Virginia State Yellow Jackets. They're playing Glenville State. That game is 0-0 in the first quarter. You have Hampton playing Villanova. That game is 0-0 in the first quarter. You also have the Campbell Fighting Camels again, as we just alluded to. They are, oh, sorry about that. That game has just started. And that game is 0-0 as well. But some of the other games that are being played right now, you have, that'll be played later. You have Tennessee State playing Murray State. That game will start at 3 p.m. Eastern. Then you also have Florida Memorial hosting the Southeastern University. And that game is going to be later on today at 6 p.m. And as I said, you have a few games that are being played right now. But, oh, we have a scoring update. And let me get you back to that. You have Villanova, who's taking a quick lead over Hampton University. And so Villanova, as you can see, is now leading Hampton by a score of 7-0. And that is early on in the first quarter. Now, with some of the other games that are going on in the in HBCU sports, as we get to these games, and as I blow this up, we are going to take a look at the CIAA. Wow, and I'm also listening to KRSB as Orlando Hughes is calling the game for Lincoln. And this game is going pretty good, so I'm listening to KRSB live on the other line. But let's take a look at the CIAA and some of the scores and some of the games that have already started there. And as you can see, Bowie State today is at Elizabeth City. So far in the first quarter, that game is 0-0. Next, you have Shawan 0-0 against Virginia Union. Of course, I don't expect that score to remain 0-0 for long. And of course, the game that is being called by KRSB by Orlando Hughes right now. As you can see, the Lincoln Lions, they're 0-0 against Virginia State in the first quarter. And you also have Winston-Salem 0-0 against Johnson C. Smith. Livingstone 0-0 in the first quarter against St. Augustine's as well. And then another game that will be played later on today at 4 p.m., you have Shaw traveling down to Fayetteville State. And that game is later on today at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And as I said, oh wow, I'm listening to some of the action. Yeah, I'm sorry, guys. I'm listening to some of the action for some of the other games for what Lincoln is trying to do today against Virginia State. So sorry about that. Just getting a little distracted here. But also in the SIAC, let's take a look at the games that are coming up later on today and some of the games that are currently in play in the SIAC. As you can see, you have Tuskegee traveling down to Kentucky State, and right now in the first quarter, that game is 0-0. Morehouse is traveling down to Albany, and that game starts at 2 p.m. Clark Atlanta will travel to Benedict, and that's a 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time game. Lane College will host Central State at 3 p.m., and Savannah State will travel down to Fort Valley State and that game will be at 6 p.m. as you can see right there. And with all of those games coming up, with Benedict College, Benedict is looking to remain undefeated against Clark Atlanta. Honestly, I just don't see anyone in the SIAC period slowing down Benedict. Benedict went into Albany State 2 weeks ago and defeated Albany State. They essentially said, you know what? You've been sitting on top of the throne long enough. It's time for a new dog to take the lead. And guess what? Benedict did it. Benedict went in. Benedict took it. And I expect Benedict to not have any trouble with Clark Atlanta at home, even though I'm quite sure Clark Atlanta will have a lot to say about that particular game. But honestly, I just don't see anyone defeating them. Tuskegee going into Kentucky State, and Kentucky State right now, I think they may have found their wheels. At least right now, they're actually doing pretty well. And let me, as a matter of fact, let me pull up Kentucky State. I want to pull up Kentucky State's football schedule because as of now, if I'm not mistaken, I think Kentucky State has won their last 2 games. And so for what Kentucky State has done, they have defeated last week one of their huge nemesis, and they defeated Miles College by a score of 35-7. And that was something that they used to have a really hard time of doing. And as a matter of fact, I apologize because Kentucky State has won their last 4 straight games. They defeated last week Miles College by a score of 35-7. They defeated Allen University by a score of 41-22. They defeated Lane College by a score of 31-26, and they went to Savannah State, who has been playing really tough, except they lost their coach this year, and they lost several players along with that. And so Savannah State is not the team that they used to be. And so Kentucky State defeated them by a score of 28-13. And this is after they lost their first 4 games. And they lost to Delta State by a score of 10-33. They lost to Fort Valley State by a score of 9-7. They lost to University of Dayton by a score of 36-3. And then, of course, they lost to Benedict by a score of 40-14. And so with them, they are 4-4 overall, but they are actually 4-1 in conference play. And with that being said, with them being 4-1 in conference play, and I'm going to pull up the SIAC conference football standing, and if I'm not mistaken, they should be on their side of the ledger. They should be number 1 or number 2 in their conference. And as I was saying, they are currently tied they are all alone in second place in conference play, in second place. But in first place happens to be, guess what? Tuskegee. And who does Kentucky State play this weekend? They are hosting Tuskegee. So this game is essentially for first place for the SIAC West Division. And whoever wins this game will be sitting on top of the West Division and will guarantee, and right now, as I said, Tuskegee is undefeated in the West Division, followed by, in second place, Kentucky State. And because of this will be a very, very interesting game between those two. And Lane happens to be in third place with a record of 3-2 in the SIAC conference as well. But with that being the case, it's going to be interesting to see whether or not Kentucky State can continue to play the type of ball that they've been playing. Now, the only team Kentucky State has lost to is Benedict. Now, if Kentucky State, and I was very high on Kentucky State for the last 2 years because I happened to have Coach Jackson, who was their former coach and who has now gone on to what he considers to be greener pastures. I used to interview Coach Jackson all the time for Kentucky State, but Kentucky State seems to have found their footing. They are 4-1 in conference play, and if they're able to get by Tuskegee, the only team that defeated them in conference play so far, or should I say, in their conference is, well, actually, both of those teams, Benedict and Fort Valley State. So, but only one of those teams was considered a conference game. Now, which one was considered a conference game, I do not know, whether it was Fort Valley State or whether it was Benedict College. But they've only lost one conference game. And with that being the case, they are doing exceptionally well. And the reason why I'm taking the time on this particular conference is because with what Benedict is currently doing, I understand you have Virginia Union over on the other side of the CIAA, and they are undefeated. No one has come close to them. The same thing with Benedict. But with what's getting ready to take place between SIAC battles, I think Virginia Union is going to handle their business. I just don't think Fayetteville State will be able to defeat them later on during the year when they have to play Virginia Union in the championship game. When Fort Valley State will have to play Virginia Union in the championship game. However, even though Benedict has defeated Kentucky State and Benedict has not played Tuskegee, I still say that Benedict may have a tougher road at winning the championship in their conference. Now, as I indicated, for Benedict, they do not play Tuskegee this year. And so if Tuskegee ends up coming out on top, you'll talk about if Tuskegee defeats Kentucky State, it will be against Tuskegee and Benedict, which means this could really shape up to be a really, big barn burner with Tuskegee playing against Benedict for the SIAC championship. But that's just me. I'm pontificating right now. I'm just looking forward to a huge game between first this week between Kentucky State and Tuskegee. And I think what's going to happen is that when these two teams play, it's going to be huge. But but until then, that's why they play the game. And we will follow these schools. We will see how they end up, and as far as I'm concerned, probably next week. I'm sorry, probably tomorrow. Oh, and I'm getting ready to go to the MEAC for a huge update, and I do mean huge. And for the MEAC scores and games that are currently being played. Now, last week, I felt that when South Carolina State played North Carolina Central, that was essentially for the win for the MEAC. Because the way I felt about the MEAC conference, I felt that South Carolina State was essentially playing possum. And what I meant by that is that they were 1-4, pretty much the same thing that they did last year. They had wiped the floor with everyone in the MEAC conference last year on their way to the Celebration Bowl and just creaming Jackson State last year in the Celebration Bowl, defeating them by a score of 31-10. This year, they're pretty much doing the exact same thing. They went 1-4 again, but they did have a scrimmage after going 1-4 against Virginia Lynchburg, and they won that game. And then, of course, they defeated North Carolina Central last week. But this week, they're playing Morgan State in Morgan State. And let's go to the score of that game. And as you can see, Morgan State at home in the second quarter, they are leading South Carolina State by a score of 17-0. You see the score, guys. That score is 17-0 in favor of Morgan State. So the Bears are beating up on the Bulldogs. And we'll see whether or not they can hold on. But the one thing is, Morgan State has a new coach. And with that new coach, the coach's name is Coach Damon Wilson. I've had him on the show last year. Coach Damon Wilson came from Bowie State. And Bowie State they had won the last 3 CIAA championships. Why? Because of their head coach, Damon Wilson. And no one came close to knocking them off their pedestal. And now, when I interviewed, just to give you some backstory, when I interviewed Coach Wilson at Media Day for the MEAC conference, I said, so how long do you expect there to be the building process to get Morgan State to be a contender, for you to be in the championship game or to be in the Celebration Bowl? And so he made a statement, and I've said it on my last few shows, and his statement was, is there going to be a championship game this year? I said, yes, sir. And he said, we expect to be in the championship game this year. And I said, yes, sir. And with that being said, I understood exactly what he was saying, because he did not mince words. He did not think that his Bears would not be in a position where they could not win and where they could not be competitive. And as far as Morgan State, right now, Morgan State, they don't have a winning record. They are 2-5 right now. And currently, the 2 games that they won were against Sacred Heart and against Virginia Lynchburg. They have currently lost to North Carolina Central. They've lost to Norfolk State. And their only 2 games in the MEAC. But this is their 3rd game in MEAC play. And in the first 2 games in MEAC play, in losing to North Carolina Central. Let's say the first game that they played was against Norfolk State. They ended up losing that game by a score of 24-21, a close game. But then the next game, the team that everyone considered being the team to beat in HBCU football at one point in time was North Carolina Central. And North Carolina Central really beat up on Morgan State by a score of 59-20. But today, hosting South Carolina State, they're currently ahead of South Carolina State by a score of 17-0. And as I said, we're going to see whether or not they can hold that lead. If that's the case, and Morgan State ends up winning this game, then that means North Carolina Central would have defeated Morgan State. Morgan State would have defeated South Carolina State, and South Carolina State would have defeated North Carolina Central, which would really put a huge question mark on who could be the team to beat in the MEAC. But there's an outlier that's out there in the MEAC, and I haven't even gone through the rest of the schedule for the MEAC conference. The outlier happens to be Howard University. And the reason why I say the outlier is Howard University is because they are 1-0 in conference play, as well as South Carolina State. But South Carolina State is currently losing. And if Howard defeats Delaware State today, and I believe they played Delaware State today. I'm sorry, they played Norfolk State today. And if they defeat Norfolk State today, guess what? They are in sole possession of first place. And I happen to have seen Howard play against Alabama State. Howard is a very scrappy team. They only got beat. They were beaten by a couple of schools, really, really bad. And they got beat by Morehouse. Morehouse is the Division II team. But Morehouse traditionally has a pretty good team. And Morehouse defeated Howard University by a score of 31-0. And for that to occur, that says, does it say a lot about Howard? Or does it say a lot about what Morehouse has? Because Howard got defeated by a Division II team, and they did not score a point. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm looking at that the wrong way. They defeated Morehouse by a score of 31-0. I was actually looking at the Harvard University game that they lost, and they lost to Harvard by a score of 41-25. I apologize for that because it was Howard defeating Morehouse, which Howard defeated them, and Morehouse is a Division II school. And I'm looking at the scores now, making sure I'm correct in what I'm stating here, because I just gave you false information. But fortunately, I was able to correct that information. But today, when they play Norfolk State University, it's going to be interesting to see whether or not Norfolk State is able to hang with them. Norfolk State is 1-1 in conference play as well, and I'll be very honest, I'm very surprised at Norfolk State, because I just knew Norfolk State would do a lot better. And Norfolk State's only win is against Morgan State. And they lost to Delaware State. And with that being the case, it'll just be interesting to see what actually happens later on down the line. But I just don't see, if Morgan State ends up winning this game, they will be 1-2 in conference play. And with all of the with the schedule for what's going to happen this week, with South Carolina State playing Morgan State, North Carolina Central playing Delaware State, and also Howard playing Norfolk State, This will essentially either muddy the water with South Carolina State being 1-1, Morgan State being 1-2, North Carolina Central being 2-1, and Howard, if Howard defeats, um, and I'm sorry, if Norfolk State defeats Howard, they would be 1-1, and Howard would be 1-1. Norfolk State would be 2-1, and then Howard would be 1-1. So you're looking at a real muddying of the water of who would be the team to talk about. But if Howard defeats Norfolk State, then Howard would be in sole possession of first place because they would be undefeated. And then the same thing would happen. Now I'm getting some static here, and I apologize to you for that. But right now, but as I said, it'll be interesting to see how these two teams fare, how all six teams fare, since this is the weekend that all six teams are playing against each other. So we will either have a muddying of the water, which is what Morgan State is trying to do right now with South Carolina State, which would make Morgan State 1-2 in the conference, and South Carolina State would also be 1-1 in conference play. And then if North Carolina Central wins today, they will be 2-1 in conference play. And then Del State, let me go back, make sure I see what the records are. Then Del State would be 1-2, tied with Morgan State if Morgan State holds on against South Carolina State. And then of course Howard University, if Norfolk State wins, then Norfolk State would end up being 2-1, and Howard would be 1-1. So we have a lot of games yet to play in the MEAC to decide who is going to be the representative from the MEAC to play in the Celebration Bowl. But all I know is that for the most part, it's just going to be a very good game. And let's see if there have been any updates in that particular game. And right now it's still 17-0. We've talked about the other games that are going to be played later on in the conference. And as we can show here, you see the Howard Bison against Norfolk, and that'll be at 2 o'clock, as well as North Carolina Central playing Delaware State, and that game is going to be at Delaware State. And we shall see whether or not the water will be muddied, or whether or not the game, everything will clear up for later action today. Now, and of course, now let's take a look at what will transpire in the SWAC conference. And right now, there are no games. No games have started in the SWAC conference, but the first game that will get started for the SWAC is going to be the Jaguars traveling down to Jackson State in Jackson, Mississippi. And I can guarantee you 60,000 fans will be in the vet today. So let's take a look at the SWAC conference and how many teams are currently playing today and what time these games will get started. And as you can see, Southern will play later on today against Jackson State, and that game is scheduled for 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And most of these games are going to be Central Standard Time. If you are listening to me from from the Central Standard Time Zone, here where I am located in the Midwest. So all of my times are in Eastern Standard Times, and the times that you see are Eastern Standard Times as well. So just make sure that you don't make a mistake and confuse the times and go to your games late, because these games, as I said, are Eastern Standard Times for these games. So as you can see, Southern University will play Jackson State at 2 p.m. Alcorn State travels to Grambling, and that game is set for 3 p.m. And in the background, you hear the game between Lincoln University against Virginia State University. And I'm listening to that game just to see if I can keep an update on what's happening, what's transpiring in that game. And right now, I believe that game is 0-0 right now. And other games that are being played, you're looking at Bethune traveling to Prairie View. That game is at 3 p.m. as well. And then, of course, you have Texas Southern playing Lincoln University, and that game is at 3 p.m. And let me scroll on back down. As I said, Texas Southern is hosting Lincoln University at 3 p.m. Alabama State, they will play out. They will host Alabama A&M. That is a huge rivalry game there, and that's going to be very interesting, especially since neither one of those schools like each other either. It'll be interesting to see who comes out in that game alive. In terms of especially for SWAC play, and just in case Jackson State falls for whatever reason. But also you have Florida A&M. They're hosting UAPB, the Arkansas Pine Bluff Golden Lions, and that game is at 4 p.m. And with all of that being said, there are a lot of great games that's out there today. A lot of people are looking at Florida A&M because with Jackson State, let's just say Jackson State wins out. Then what Jackson State will do, they will end up going to and representing the SWAC in the Celebration Bowl. Now, as far as a representative from the SWAC for the FCS playoffs, Florida A&M qualified to go last year, and the FCS playoff committee is continuing to look at Florida A&M as a representative for the SWAC to go to the FCS playoffs again this year. So if Florida A&M continues to win out, and unfortunately, as much as I hate to say, this is my mom alma mater, being UAPB, and if Florida A&M defeats UAPB and continues to win out, and with their last game being against Bethune-Cookman, I don't see anyone defeating Florida A&M either. And with that being the case, then Florida A&M would be in a position to represent the SWAC again in the FCS playoffs. Whereas if Jackson State continues to matriculate through the SWAC and play in the SWAC championship game, and based upon where everything is going, folks, and I'll be the first one to say, there could be a second meeting between Jackson State and Southern University. And the reason why I say that is because what's happening between those two schools is this. And as I confirm what I want to say is that Southern University is currently leading the West, and they're 3-1, but they're tied with Prairie View. The only problem is let's see, I believe Southern has already played Prairie View, and that was the and strangely enough, that was the team that their current head coach, Coach Eric Dooley, left. So Coach Eric Dooley is coaching Southern, and he was the previous head coach for Prairie View. And this year, when they went back to Prairie View, Southern University defeated Prairie View by a score of 45-13. Wow. 45-13. Southern University is coming into this game on a 3-game winning streak. And the last 3 games on a 4-game winning streak. And just to give you an idea of what they've done in those 4 games, UAPB 59-3, Prairie View 45-13, Alcorn 21-17. And even though they had a scrimmage last week just to prepare for this game, they ended up winning this game, winning the game that they played last week by a score of 51-7, and that game was against Virginia University at Lynchburg. And as I said, that was just their scrimmage. And then next week they will play Florida A&M. And as I said, if Florida A&M wins out, then they will be the representative for the SWAC conference. But Southern and Florida A&M, they have some big games yet to be played. But right now, as it stands, Southern University is in the driver's seat. So even if they lose this game, to Jackson State, there is an enormous chance that Jackson State and Southern University could face each other again. Because even if Jackson State loses this game, they would be tied with Florida A&M. Florida A&M currently is 3-1. Jackson State has the tiebreaker. Why? Because they defeated Florida A&M. The next team, oh, I'm sorry, excuse me, please. The next team is Alabama A&M. Jackson State has not played Alabama A&M as of yet, and that game against Alabama A&M is in 2 weeks. Next week, Alabama A&M will play Mississippi Valley, and in the following week, they will play against Jackson State, and that game will be in Mobile, Alabama, and that looks to be a huge game between those two teams. As they and if Jackson State continues to win, Alabama A&M continues to win, there's just a little bit of bad blood between those two schools. That could be a fight for first place. And if Alabama A&M defeats Jackson State, then that could be the game that decides what happens. However, Florida A&M also defeated Alabama A&M, so you'd have to figure out the tiebreaker, and then the tiebreaker would probably be how many points each team won by against each other in common opponents, and that would probably be, and especially since Florida A&M would have defeated Jackson State, but Jackson State would have defeated Florida A&M. Florida A&M. So yes, a lot of games to be played, but Jackson State, all Jackson State has to do is to continue to win out. If Southern loses and they continue to win out, then Jackson State and Southern University will play again in the SWAC championship game. And as everyone knows, it's really hard to defeat an opponent twice. So whoever wins this game, it's almost a shoo-in, almost a guarantee, especially if Jackson State wins. If Jackson State wins, it's almost a shoo-in that Southern University will return and play Jackson State. And the only reason why I say that is because the other team is Texas Southern.
By Isaiah Freeman. He's the second leading rusher for this Lions team, and he puts him on the board first with that nice scramble. 6 O's our score as we Joe Price set to.
And you're hearing it live. You're hearing it live directly from KRSB with Orlando Hughes. And as he just indicated,
so at 10:26, we got our first flags, maybe a motion.
And as you can hear, on KRSB with Orlando Hughes, Lincoln just ended up scoring against Virginia State, and that score now is 6-0. And the Lincoln Lions are the score is 6-0.
Nice run for Lincoln.
And we're just waiting on the extra point.
Hats off to Coach D, no hesitation. There's Bryce.
As we listen to the KRSB broadcast.
There's a snap, the hold, the kick is up and through the uprights, and it is good. So the Lions strike first. 7 O's our score. 10:26 here in a second. We'll be back to Lincoln Stadium after this. You are listening to the KRSB Network.
And there you hear it, and there you heard it live, folks, from KRSB Network. And Virginia State University is trailing They are trailing the Lincoln Lions by a score of 7-0, and that is in the second quarter. And we're giving you live footage, live as you heard it live, right here on YourStreet.tv, and you heard it live from KRSB Network, and the voice of Orlando Hughes coming to you live from Lincoln University. And so the Lincoln Lions are on top with the score of 7-0. But as I was saying, with this game today for Jackson State, and we have another update, folks, in the MEAC. So let's go back. Hold the horses on the SWAC. But let's go to the MEAC. And we were talking about Morgan State and South Carolina State. Now the score happens to be 17-14. But the Morgan State Bears, they're still leading in the second quarter, but here come the Bulldogs. And that score, as I said, is 17-14. South Carolina State is saying, hold up, folks. We're just getting ready to play the game, and it's going to be a good one. So we'll see whether or not Morgan State can hold on, or whether or not South Carolina State is saying, yeah, we were just playing possum with you two, and we're going to come back and win this game as well. And if they come back and win this game, then I'm sorry. They would have already defeated North Carolina Central. They would have knocked off Morgan State. I'm sorry, everyone else. Howard. Love the coach for Howard. But I'm sorry. Here comes Coach Pugh again. And he's going to go back to the Celebration Bowl if they come back and win this game. But as I said, it'll be kind of interesting to see what all transpires and how things matriculate in the MEAC conference. But going back to the SWAC conference, as I said, for Jackson State is hosting Southern, and there's a great chance for Jackson State and Southern University to play one more time in the SWAC championship game, because Southern has already defeated Prairie View, but they lost to Texas Southern. And with them losing to Texas Southern, Southern would have to lose 2 games. Well, actually, one more game in conference play for them to be tied with Texas Southern. And if they tie with Texas Southern, but if Prairie View continues to win, being 3-1, and honestly, I don't see anyone stopping Prairie View other than Alcorn, because I'm sorry, Bethune, but I don't see anyone in conference play that can stop Prairie View from winning or losing another game. So if Southern loses one more conference game, Prairie View remains with a one-loss conference record, then guess what? This is a repeat conference championship game between last year's teams, Jackson State and Prairie View. And so Southern, and the one thing I apologize to you folks is I don't know whether or not this game against Jackson State is a conference game. And if it is a conference game, then guess what? If Jackson State wins, Prairie View wins, then guess what happens? Southern is in second place, which means Southern will have to depend on someone defeating Prairie View for Southern to play against Jackson State a second time in the Southwestern Athletic Conference game. And what I'm looking to do is see if I can pull up Jackson State's schedule to see whether or not it will state whether or not this is a conference game or not. And that's what I want to see, if they will state that. And right now, I don't see anything that's saying whether or not this is a conference game. So I apologize to you. Um, but I believe that this game will be counted as a conference game between Jackson State and Southern. I know certain games are not counted as a conference game, but I believe that this game is being counted as a conference game between Southern, which means if Southern University loses this game, they will fall to 3-2 in conference play. And if Prairie View ends up winning this game, then Prairie View will end up being on top of the conference in their division. And Prairie View ends up playing today Bethune-Cookman, as I mentioned earlier. And if they end up winning against Bethune, I don't see anyone defeating them. And I don't see anyone having any type of success against them at all. So it'll be interesting to see what transpires and what actually will happen there. But let's go ahead before we close out today and see some of the scores of some of the other games. And these scores are coming to you courtesy of yourstreet.tv. And as we take a look at some of the HBCU schools that are not in an HBCU conference, Villanova is still leading Hampton University by a score of 7-0, as you can see there. Some of these other games, West Virginia State is still tied with Glenville State 0-0. You have the Campbell Fighting Camels. They're leading North Carolina A&T by a score of 14-7. And of course, some of the other games that are currently being played. You have those games that are still haven't started as of yet. And we stated earlier, Virginia State is losing to Lincoln by a score of 7-0. And as far as the other games, they are currently in the first quarter, but there are no scores. And as far as the SIAC goes, the only game that is currently in play is Kentucky State and Tuskegee, and that game is currently tied at 0-0. The one game that we just updated you on, Morgan State and South Carolina State, that game is in the second quarter, and that game is still 14-17. Morgan State still in the lead. The other games are yet to be started. And of course, in the SWAC conference, you have those games. The first game in the SWAC that is going to start in, as a matter of fact, in the next few minutes, Jackson State is hosting the Jaguars of Southern University, and that game will start at 2 p.m. And as I said, that game should be starting within the next 7 minutes. And folks, I hope you guys are having yourself a great time as you have listened to the updates, listened to the scores, and hopefully you're either listening to the Morgan State game, listening to the Lincoln against Virginia State game. Morgan State, as I said, is on right now. That game is being broadcast on ESPN. Jackson State is also going to be another game that's going to be on one of those ESPN flavors of stations. So hopefully you'll be able to watch that game. But listen to Lincoln University against Virginia State on KRSB Network. And if you are unable to find it, just make sure you go online to KRSB, and you should be able to follow that game live as well, as the game is being called by Orlando Hughes, a good friend of mine. So make sure you follow your favorite HBCU school. Make sure that not only that, but you support your favorite HBCU school or the school that you are an alum of. Because I know, just like I told my kids, you may not go to an HBCU, but my money is going to Jackson State. Why is it going to Jackson State? Because that's where I graduated from. And because of that, JSU will always receive some type of donation from me and my wife. And my twins are currently seniors at Jackson State, and we look forward for them to matriculate. And on April the 29th, 2023, they will graduate. And we're looking forward to that day as well as they are. And I have one more child that's in the hopper, and she will be in college in 24. And we're looking forward to that. I hope I'm correct about that. But yes, she will be in college in 2024. And of course, you know the hope of where we're hoping for her to go, and that's Jackson State. But we also had our oldest to go to Florida A&M. But guess what? Even though he didn't go to Jackson State, he went to an HBCU. Now, do I have anything against any of the other schools? No, I do not. Because I do not teach at an HBCU school. I happen to teach at another university that is not an HBCU. And I will treat every student the same as if I were at an HBCU, because they deserve that. And they deserve the type of teaching, the nurturing that you need to prepare the next group of individuals that will run this country, one way, shape, form, or fashion. And if we do not treat them equally, how do you think racism, how do you think biases occur? We have to treat people equally. And if we don't, racism will continue to occur. I have all of my students, and the majority of my students have to be Caucasian. And guess what? The majority of my students, they come by my classroom, even when they don't have class. Why? Because I treat everyone the same. And because I treat everyone the same, they see it, they hear it, and they know it. And I do not hold anything back. And that's what everyone should do, to not hold anything back from anyone, but just treat everyone equal. And if we treat everyone equal, guess what will happen? This will be a much better place to live in. Much better place to live in. And with that being said, may God bless you. May God keep you. And we will see you in a few. And just keep your eyes and ears peeled, because there may be an opportunity for a pregame show. A post-game show either later on tonight or even tomorrow. But I will say on next week, we will be in Central State University, and we will actually be producing a game for ESPN between Kentucky State and Central State University. So you will not see us live on next Saturday, unless I'm able to break away. But you will not see us next Saturday, because we will be producing another game for another network. But with that being said, may God bless you, may God keep you, and we will see you in the future. And that will be, if not tonight, tomorrow, or Monday night, but just keep your ears open for when we come to you discussing the games that have taken place and also the upcoming games for next week. And with that being said, God bless.